feel like I'm losing my...
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiega, here on December the 4th, here on a Wednesday, just before we get started on Week 14 of the NFL. We're here to talk about some of the storylines and still going through the games that we had in Week 13 and expanding them a little bit, not just talking about the games, but bringing up some topics that I had thought of over the course of Sunday and up until now. But we're going to start off by talking about the newest version of Hard Knocks, the in-season version premiered yesterday following an entire division, not just one team. The AFC North is featured on there, and I subscribe to it, so we're going to watch and we're going to talk about it. I watched it, we're going to talk about it, and just everything that we learned from it from yesterday's premiere. Also, we're going to, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Bucs game, the Seahawks game, also over the Jets, while previewing the Falcons and the Vikings game coming up next week, which should be a good one. All of that is coming up on today's show. Before we get started, though, on, talking further about Hard Knocks, I wanted to remind you guys, as I always do, if you guys have any questions or comments that you'd like to share during today's live show, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always a big part of what makes this show great. So whether it's anything related to the NFL, any topics that we have on the screen, or just anything you guys want to bring up, please, again, get involved with the show. And if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and it's actually featured on the show by one of our hosts, please use the new Super Chat feature just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel, and we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate it whenever you guys are able to do that, kind of give back to the show while also contributing as well with anything you have to share and any insights you'd like to add to the show as well. So again, go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. So with that now being said, we can start and talk about the Hard Knocks, which people are still talking about as close as like a couple weeks ago with Daniel Jones and that whole thing that happened with the Giants. So that was obviously a big hit. The preseason version with the Chicago Bears, I guess not so much. I don't really hear people bringing that up. But this is the first time ever Hard Knocks and HBO are featuring an entire division on their show. They decided to go with the AFC North, and what I think is really interesting about this is that they're following them, or at least it starts just based off of the first episode from this past week, Week 13 in the NFL, which I think, some people might not like it just because, if you're a Bengals fan or something, you're a Browns fan, you're not really looking forward to seeing the behind-the-scenes things, I guess, if your team's not really in it. But I think it's still fascinating, and just based off of the first episode, I'm already hooked. It premiered last night, this new version of Hard Knocks, and I've, just as a disclaimer, I've never really tuned in to watch Hard Knocks, no preseason version, no off-season version or anything like that. But because I am a Steelers fan, and because, this intrigued me, just because it is the AFC North, some of the best teams, some of the best offenses, and some of the best players in the NFL, I thought, why not give it a try, see what it's all about. And already I'm definitely not regretting my decision to tune in. And the first episode was very interesting, not just from the fact that we saw them kind of prepare for Week 13, the Bengals and the Steelers taking on each other. That made it even better. And how they went into the preparation, you kind of felt like you were in the meetings as well with some of the scenes and cutscenes that they had in there as well. And just how each coach, each assistant coach, the wide receiver coach, offensive line coach, all, have their input on what goes into a game plan, which, I've never really watched Hard Knocks, so that could be something that's a staple of it. But from just the first time seeing it and just how it relates to the Steelers preparing for the Bengals and the Bengals preparing for the Steelers, and how this game means so much to each team, but in a different way, right? Obviously, the Bengals trying to, get back into it, trying to stay alive in the playoffs, and how that message is reciprocated compared to the Steelers, where they're leading the division, but still trying to go out there and not take the Bengals lightly. And then that's only a few things that, the first episode of Hard Knocks brought. You get that, aspect of it, how it relates to each one when they're playing each other. Also, the Brown situation, again, completely different from what the Steelers are facing, or the Ravens as well. We saw them and how, they addressed the Justin Tucker, issues with missing kicks and their preparation for the Eagles game and things like that, and how they went into it during the game and as well as after, dealing with that loss. And we talked about the Bengals as well, and then of course the Steelers. You didn't get to see too much of the Browns, to be fair, just because they played on Monday. So you kind of just saw the lead up to it, not so much what transpired during the game, like you saw with the other teams. But some other things that I liked about this was that you get to see, what it would be like on a Wednesday or on a Thursday, right? In some of these meetings where they go over different things. I thought that was super cool. But I think the overall consensus from what I've seen has been that the Steelers and Mike Tomlin definitely stole the show, at least the first episode in Hard Knocks, because one, the Steelers have never featured on any, rendition of Hard Knocks, so this is the first time that they're really doing anything like this, and everybody knows and hears what's said about Mike Tomlin, right? He's a player's coach. Everybody wants to play for him. He has all these Tomlinisms and things like that, but you can only go so far into kind of thinking you understand what any of that's like. And, Hard Knocks isn't the full experience of getting to know Mike Tomlin, right? But you do get a little bit more of an extra layer to it, and I think that reveals plenty. Just from this first episode, I saw something on X where they described this first episode as the Steelers Hard Knocks with cameos from the Browns, the Ravens, and the Bengals, because they really focused in on the Steelers, and it might just be because, they've never had them on Hard Knocks, but I thought it was awesome to see them, the preparation, the meetings, and how Mike Tomlin gets his team amped up and ready to play. There were some really cool moments, especially when you get that relativity from Mike Tomlin and connecting with his players. The one with Nick Herbig at one point in the episode where it might have been like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and he's already getting him prepared for that matchup with Orlando Brown because Alex Highsmith isn't playing, so he's getting him ready, he's getting him, amped up, and just kind of planting that seed in his head on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Then he reminds him of it later on in the week, and then during the game, it all comes into fruition, and you see like Mike Tomlin on the sideline loving it, he's cheesing, he's loving the fact that it all came together like this, and then the heart-to-heart, one-to-one moment with Nick Herbig afterwards as well was awesome to see Mike Tomlin as a coach and how he's able to get so much out of his players, and not just Nick Herbig, but the conversation he had with George Pickens after the pick six that was technically, I guess, on him, on the guy that was covering him, and then just how he brought him in, how he reels him in, and then you get into a place where you imagine, because obviously this isn't the first time where George might have gone a little bit overboard or where you might have lost him in the course of the game. So it gets you thinking, when you hear that conversation, where you hear that, coach to player, almost father to son like conversation, what other things maybe Mike Tomlin has said to him to kind of reel him in. And again, it was super cool to see how not only he spoke to George, but how George responded there afterwards, and they ended up winning the game, obviously. And not just with the Steelers, right, but with John Harbaugh and the Ravens, and going through a typical week-to-week, day-to-day. Jameis Winston was also talking, involved with the preparation during the week, obviously with the Browns, and then getting ready for the Denver Broncos. I wanted to shout out the Browns assistant offensive line coach. I hope I'm saying his name right. Roy Istvan. He's the assistant offensive line coach, and he was awesome to see because, if you don't really follow any of the other teams, if you're just a fan of one team like I am, you don't really know anything about the other teams, and the way that he conducted his meeting and just all the explicitives and how just passionate and animated he was super funny. And again, just really cool to see. And also, just overall, the initial thoughts from it, I think it's a great idea just because I only kind of like cover the surface level things. You know, you could go even further in depth as to what you saw and all the small details that Hard Knocks and HBO kind of brought into this new series. But I mean, you could talk for hours about it. At least I could, because of how like cool it was. It kind of made you. I've never played football ever in my life, but it made me, kind of want to go out there and play. And I mean, it was great. I'm gonna keep watching it. I'm fully hooked now, and I think I'm just gonna come and review these each episode that comes out. Each episode comes out at 9 p.m. Eastern time each Tuesday. So yeah, I mean, the first episode was great, and it's just gonna continue on for the rest of the regular season, which should be pretty cool when obviously the Steelers play the Bengals again. They're gonna play the Browns this upcoming week, so that's probably gonna be a big part of next week's episode in this already. And I think this is a great idea. Having the in-season version of a division like this, it just makes it a lot easier, I think, to stay hooked with it, because it's not just one thing you're focusing on. It's not so monotone. You have different teams, different issues, and things like that. I think the NFL hit it on the head with this series. But we have a lot more to get to on today's show, other than just talking about what we saw on TV. We got to get to Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, two second-year quarterbacks that faced a lot of adversity during this season in their second year in the NFL, but have found a good sort of trend right now. They found a good spot where they're really improving and showing a lot of promise. And why is that? And, how did we get here? Evidently. So we're going to get to that once we return after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live.
Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss nothing really about a game or anything like that, but related to one of these games, because this past week we saw some more from two very young quarterbacks in Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. Two second-year quarterbacks that have seen a lot more downs than ups so far in their short NFL careers. If you look at Bryce Young having a rough first year, and then the start of this year could only be described as, not being able to get any worse of a start to his second year than what transpired in the first 4 weeks, right? He hit as close to rock bottom as he probably could have in your second year, and so he was benched, right after that. Then you have Anthony Richardson, kind of a similar scenario where the first year didn't go to plan, right? Obviously, he was injured for most of it, so he kind of redshirted. Then coming into this year, he was pronounced as the starter, obviously, and, he did all right the first few weeks, but then it boiled over when, the results weren't really there, right? He wasn't blowing anybody out of the water with his performance on the field, and then you had the whole tapping out situation, things like that, and it got pretty dicey pretty early in this season for Anthony Richardson, and not just on the field, but then when you start bringing it outside of the football field and people maybe questioning his character or his worth ethic or things like that, it gets a little bit tricky, especially, again, being only in your second year and having this much to deal with this much adversity can get pretty tough. So both of them had to deal with being benched at some point this year. And, from that point on, despite all of that and all the questioning and all the, the down moments they had to go through as individuals and as a team, obviously because the Colts were in a bit of a rut. Same thing with the Panthers. They are just now kind of showing some sort of life from their performances. Despite all of that, you look at Bryce Young now, and focusing on Bryce Young here for just a moment, him now coming back to the starting role from week 8 up until now, it's looked like not a completely different player, but you wouldn't be able to tell that this guy, started the first 4 weeks as badly as he did. To now look at him now and see where he is right now, you probably would have a hard time believing it's the same quarterback, but it's definitely looking a lot more promising, and he almost had huge wins. There's still some merit in coming close to defeating the Chiefs and coming close to defeating the Buccaneers this past Sunday, but could you imagine if he got those 2 wins again in the same season where the first 4 weeks were just awful, and then just like months later, a month and a half later, you're defeating the reigning Super Bowl champion and a team that could be the best in your division? How unlikely that seems, right? And he didn't win the games obviously, but being in a position where they almost did and him playing very well, it's definitely a lot better of a spot than where they were, obviously at the start of this season. And, just comparing it, Bryce Young at the start with those first 4 games, he was averaging only 75 yards per game. He hadn't thrown a single passing touchdown, and he had 3 interceptions through the first 4 weeks before he was ultimately benched for the veteran Andy Dalton. Then you look at Bryce Young after he came back, after they started him after week 8, and over the last 5 games now, he went from averaging 75 yards per game to averaging 216 yards per game. He's thrown 6 passing touchdowns over the last 5 games, and he still has 3 interceptions, again, over the last 5 games. Completely different numbers, right, other than the interceptions. A lot more productivity, and his accuracy has obviously improved a lot. And the Panthers are still 9-3, or not 9-3, 3-9. So the record, the wins and losses are pretty irrelevant now because you're not gonna go to the playoffs, obviously. But these performances definitely matter when you're talking about development, and we're gonna get into the issues, right, with mishandling young quarterbacks a little bit later. But it's good to see the Panthers focusing on developing Bryce, and each and every week it seems like he's taking just a little tiny step in the right direction, which is probably all you could ask for after everything they've gone through so far. Being here at this point now is definitely a positive sign that the Carolina Panthers cannot say that they've had a lot of over the last couple of seasons. But that's Bryce Young. That's only one part of the puzzle. Then you got Anthony Richardson, who was benched during week 9, but came back in a lot shorter time than Bryce Young did. He came back week 11, and since then it's been 3 weeks where he too looks very different than what he did in the first part of the season. Through the first 6 games, he was completing 44% of his passes. He had 4 passing touchdowns and 7 interceptions in his first 6 starts in 2024. Then once he's come back, and once we've gone through the Lions game, the Jets game, and the Patriots game now over the last 3 weeks, he's completing his passes from 44% now at 52%. He's thrown 1 less passing touchdown, going from 4 down to 3, but he's thrown 2 interceptions over the last 3 games rather than 7. And he's led the Colts to some pretty exciting comeback victories against the Jets, and this past week against the Patriots, where he converted essentially the game-winning play, the 2-point conversion, to help the Colts win that game. And they're still in the playoff hunt too, as well, where Bryce Young, it's a little bit different. They're just focusing on developing him. The Colts are trying to do that, but also, if the Broncos slip up here, maybe they drop a game or 2 and the Colts continue to win through Anthony Richardson, I think it'll only help them even more. So overall, just from what we've seen from Bryce and Anthony Richardson so far, some things to consider is that these two guys are, one, still very, very young. They're 22 and 23 years old. And for as exciting as they may look right now and how, much better they do look from where they started, they're nowhere near, the level that I think you would consider a solid, an average to pretty good starting quarterback. They're nowhere near that. And that's even more exciting as well because they're playing pretty good right now. And seeing the progression, seeing the growth, I think is a huge thing, especially with a guy like Bryce where, he's been through 3 head coaches already, 2 offensive coordinators already in only 2 years. And at the beginning of this year, there was a lot of talks about him having regressed instead of progressed in his second year. There was a lot of people saying that he was somehow getting worse in this situation, how, you start bringing in the trade and the outside, consequences, I guess you could say, of the Panthers trading so much for him and then just adding more pressure and piling it on Bryce Young, where really, that's not really his fault that the Panthers traded all of that away to get him when they knew the situation wasn't ideal, but, it gets piled on Bryce. So the area, the, skill sets that they have right now, it's exciting, it's improving, right? But it's nowhere near where you'd like an average to pretty good quarterback, starting quarterback to be, which makes it even better, I think, for the Panthers and the Colts. And also looking at Anthony Richardson so far too, he's 22 years old, and he came in a little bit differently just because he only threw 393 passes in college before making that massive jump to the NFL. So he clearly needed a lot more room to kind of go through, get better, have some bad moments, and all of that was going to eventually pay off, right, if you put in the time to help him out. But of course, he gets injured his first year, so you kind of lose a year there, and you feel more urgency coming into this year, so that's a little bit annoying. But I think when I'm talking about these two quarterbacks and people want to bring up the benching and how it was such a great thing for them, I think in a situation like that, or at least in both of these situations, the credit and the merit, I guess you could say, should go to Bryce and Anthony Richardson, not so much the organizations for actually benching them. I think a lot more credit should go to Bryce and Anthony Richardson for, accepting being benched, because it's not anything easy, right? Bryce was the first overall pick, and then you see like CJ and all the success he's had, and then Anthony Richardson gets selected at number 4, and it's the same thing. They're not really having the success CJ is, and that begins to weigh on you, right? Even if they won't admit it, it's something that's always being brought up, especially being in the same draft class and all of them being drafted top 5. It's almost inevitable not to be compared to one another. So you had that, plus the fact that, the organizations, I believe, didn't do a great job of building around them or, surrounding them with a pretty clear plan. So I think getting benched and, really hitting rock bottom, I think a lot of the credit should go to Bryce and Anthony Richardson for getting over it, learning from it, and still remaining ready to go back in there and become a starter. And they were able to do that, and now look at them, right? They're the face of the organization once again, right? It might seem a little unfair, but credit for both of them for learning from it and improving on it as well, especially when the organization, right, hasn't really done its part, especially more so on the Panthers and how their roster is still very poorly put together. The Colts have done a better job, but still, it's weird when you're trying to mix development and, being patient with a young quarterback like it should be, with guys trying to preserve their jobs, right? Like Frank Reich, like Dave Canales, right? That's why I think I take some of the credit away from them when it comes to the benching and how it's paid off for the organization and their quarterbacks, because I feel like those decisions are sort of made when you're trying to consider winning in the moment, right? You're trying to consider how do we just get wins, right? Do we have to bench him and kind of stop that progression, stop that learning curve, or do we continue to put him in here, even if it could cost me my job, even if it could see more losses than wins coming up on the schedule, right? That's why, you never really know why organizations bench their quarterbacks. Is it because they think it'll do them well, or is it because they just want to win some games to eventually kind of save their jobs, right? But that is what it is now. Again, good for Bryce, good for Anthony Richardson for getting over it, and it's pretty rare to see, both of them go through similar situations and both of them come out looking a lot better from it. In a year where there's been a lot of irregularity with, the level of play of some teams. Some teams aren't playing where they should be. Others are blowing expectations out of the water. I think it just adds to that narrative so far in 2024. So with that being the case, we'll move on to some of the other topics we have on today's show. We're going to recap two other games that I have on here that I think were pretty important for the NFL season and the playoffs. First, starting with the Bucs game against the Carolina Panthers here, connecting to this segment. The Bucs get an overtime victory over the Carolina Panthers and inch closer to a division title. Are the Buccaneers going to win the NFC South? We're going to answer that question when we return after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the action now to go over a couple more games that were pretty impactful to where we are right now in the NFL season regarding the playoffs and teams jostling for a position here. I wanted to bring up the Bucs game and the Carolina Panthers game because it was pretty exciting for, the build-up to this game. Maybe you didn't think it was going to be that exciting because of the Panthers and obviously where the Bucs are, right, in, their stage of their team building. But this one was very close, obviously, by the score. And if you watched it, there was a moment right after the Panthers got to the end of the game and they scored that touchdown where you're thinking, like, this could be one of the massive victories that the Panthers get this year. They missed out just barely on the Chiefs, but this could be their moment. Obviously, it didn't go that way, but overall, the Buccaneers were really flirting with a defeat here to the Carolina Panthers that would have definitely been a huge, just hit to their playoff chances. If they dropped the game to the Panthers, where there's going to be tougher games coming up, it would have definitely made their playoff chances just really disintegrate from that point on. And also, especially, there was a scary moment just for the Buccaneers in that third quarter where Baker Mayfield went down and there was some worry that it was an Achilles injury just based on how it looked. And Baker Mayfield even said it afterwards how he also thought it was his Achilles, but it just turned out to be that somebody actually just stepped on him and something like that. But, if you consider the loss and you consider the potential loss also of Baker Mayfield, that really would have been a catastrophic afternoon for the Buccaneers. But luckily, they came out at the end of it pretty much unscathed. But Baker Mayfield returned in that game and helped them get a gritty overtime victory over the Carolina Panthers. It was a 26-23 final score to secure back-to-back victories for the Buccaneers after coming off of their bye week, and now they sit with a 6-6 record, tied for first in the NFC South, whereas the Panthers fall to 3-9, but it certainly feels like something has clicked for them, and it could also be because Bryce Young now, like we just kind of finished talking about, has really looked a lot better since being benched, and we saw it in this game. We saw it against especially the Kansas City Chiefs, and how, that defense is a lot better, I would say, than the Buccaneers defense. So the fact that Bryce was so close in that game to kind of orchestrating a victory, and the same thing in this game, I think it fills you with a lot of confidence if you're a Panthers fan, obviously, right? Not really caring too much about the wins and losses, right, because of the record. I thought that was a certain positive that you could take away from this if you, again, are a Panthers fan. Then some things that were interesting about this game that I kind of forgot was that Baker, his former team, that cut him back in 2022. So that's an interesting piece of news that I kind of forgot about, because that was definitely not the most glamorous portion of Baker Mayfield's career. Obviously, one that I'm sure he tries to forget, but he definitely doesn't miss a chance to kind of stick it to his old team. Certainly, he's still undefeated against them. Also for the Buccaneers, Bucky Irving, their rookie running back, ran for a career high in this game with 152 rushing yards. That really helped them out and helped keep their offense, flowing, obviously, for the majority of the game. But it was really a devastating fumble in overtime by Chuba Hubbard that led the Buccaneers to getting the ball back and then hitting that game-winning field goal there in the end to just barely get out of this game with a victory, right? Because they actually got the ball first in overtime, and then they really didn't do much with it. I believe they punted it right back to the... I believe that's right. They punted it back to the Carolina Panthers, and then they were driving. Adam Thielen makes that crazy catch, and once you see a play like that, you're thinking, like, it feels like the energy, the whatever it may be, is on the Panthers side. And once they're, Adam Thielen's like snagging balls with one hand, just like that, and it feels like things are just falling their way. So at that point, I'm thinking, like, wow, like the Panthers are actually going to win this game for no reason at all. Really, the Buccaneers had all the reasons to win this game, but I was really starting to feel down. But then, of course, you get that devastating Chuba Hubbard fumble. The Buccaneers get the ball back, and they make no mistake about it and go down and win the game after, Chase McLaughlin hits that game-winning field goal. But overall in this game, also just looking at it from a macro standpoint, that's back-to-back 250 plus passing yards and 1 touchdown games for Bryce Young over the last couple of games. It's back-to-back games with 23 plus points for the Carolina Panthers as well. Again, despite the wins and losses, those are 2 major victories for an offense that was certainly struggling. They traded away Deontay Johnson, and it was really looking bad, quite honestly. They got, destroyed the first couple weeks of the season. So now to see that, and also where Bryce Young is definitely a huge positive for the Carolina Panthers. But also, in this game, Carolina had the lead at halftime, 10-13, and did a great job to kind of keep it close, and not only just keep it close in terms of score, but when you look at the Buccaneers and you look at Mike Evans, Rachaad White, Cade Otton, Bucky Irving, all these weapons that they have, even still without Chris Godwin, one of their best players, and then you look at the Panthers offense, right? No offense, but it's not the same level of talent. But for them to even stay with them during this game and even have the lead when late in the game there, I thought that's also an encouraging sign for this Carolina Panthers team. And on that final drive, where I kind of briefly skimmed over it before, it was really exceptional because they got the ball with about 3 minutes left in the game, obviously, and they were down, I want to say, they were down 20-16. They were down 20-16 with about 3 minutes left, and Bryce Young in that offense orchestrated a 9-play, 60-yard drive to score a touchdown, no less, and leave about 30 seconds for the Buccaneers to try and go down and at least get a field goal to extend this game to overtime. And that's as perfect as you could draw it up, right? Because 3 minutes is still a lot of time, and you know you have to score a touchdown, so there's that natural response to get it done quickly. So it takes a level of maturity and great game planning and everything like that to get it so perfectly that you only leave the Buccaneers with 30 seconds left on the clock. You chewed up 2 minutes and 30 seconds of it through timeouts, through the 2-minute warning and everything. To get it down that low was definitely a huge credit to the Panthers. But obviously, the Buccaneers tied it, and credit to them too for getting down the field in like 30, 25 seconds as well. It's definitely not as easy as it looks, right? When some people might think that, oh, all you need is a field goal, right? You can just get there pretty quickly. It's not that easy. So that was still pretty awesome by the Buccaneers as well. And now you look at the aftermath of this game, right? Mainly for the Buccaneers, right? Are we sitting here thinking that they're going to win the NFC South? Because I have a hard time understanding who's going to win it, because now they're tied for first with the Atlanta Falcons for the NFC South title. After the Falcons lose their third straight game in a row, both of them sit at 6-6, and Atlanta is still technically in first place because they won both matchups directly against the Buccaneers. But I don't think it's any surprise or any crazy statement to say that Atlanta is kind of treading water right now. They're sputtering right now, especially on offense, where that should have been the strength of this team, because it's definitely not their defense. Also with Kirk Cousins not looking great either. There's a lot of concern around him and the doubts about his mobility or the lack thereof. It's a bit worrying right now for the Falcons, and it feels like they're trending in the wrong way, right? The traffic is flowing this way. Everyone's heading to the playoffs. Everyone's trying to get better. They're going this way, where the Falcons, it seems like they're going that way a little bit. So that is a little bit worrying. But the Buccaneers, are they going to kind of piece it all together? Because, they almost lost this game. So does that give you even more confidence that they were able to, get into overtime and win the game overall, that they're just going to win it? Or, are those games going to come back and bite them because they couldn't beat the Falcons in one of those head-to-head games? And then you kind of start looking at the schedule, right, a little bit. It's not too hard, but it's also, like, pretty close when you look at the upcoming opponents for the Falcons and also for the Buccaneers. The Falcons have a pretty big game coming up against the Vikings. Then they're going to travel to Las Vegas. They have the Giants at home. They travel to Washington, and then they close it out with the Panthers at home. Whereas the Buccaneers have a home game against the Raiders, travel to play the Chargers, travel to play the Dallas Cowboys, play the Panthers again at home, and then close it out with a home game against the Saints. So, I mean, it's not, I don't think maybe, how many of these teams? You got 3 playoff teams here, maybe. You have 3 maybe playoff teams for both of these teams that they're going to play, right? The Vikings, the Chargers, and the Commanders. And the Falcons play 2 of them, while the Buccaneers only play 1 of them. So I guess now looking at it, the Bucs definitely have an easier path to get there just because of the strength of schedule. But, the Cowboys, I'm not going to hype up the Cowboys, but they've won a couple games now recently. The Bucs had some struggles with the Panthers. The Falcons, I don't know how I can really hype them up because they play the Vikings and they're not looking great. The Falcons aren't. They still play the Commanders away in Las Vegas. Could probably be trickier than it should be. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who I think is going to win. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the Buccaneers and 1 being the Falcons, and, my decision on 1 to 10 being who I kind of favor right now, I would probably say I'm at about a 4 right now, just slightly favoring the Buccaneers, but I don't really know. I can't give a dead set answer because I think it's going to be super close, and it would suck for the Buccaneers if it would just come down to the head-to-head because, they'd be out of the playoffs probably. So, yeah, I mean, we've learned a little bit more about the NFC South now after these games, but it's going to get even more interesting as we go along. Steve Garza, I saw your question. I'm not ignoring it. I'm just going to go to a quick break, and when we return, I'm going to get to your question, and we're going to talk about the Seahawks and the Jets game this past weekend. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here to join the action once again, Steve Garza. Thank you for joining the show. And the question was Flex 1, Pacheco, Hopkins, Njoku, QJ. I'm starting Jonnu in the tight end spot. If I were to pick, I'm assuming that's what the question is. Out of those guys, I would probably go with Pacheco. I'm a big fan, advocate also of the running backs over the wide receivers. I've come to learn that this season with my inability to draft running backs as well in fantasy. So I would definitely lean towards the running backs, because I mean, who do the Chiefs play this week? I don't even know. Who do they play? They play the Chargers. So yeah, I mean, I think I would go with Pacheco there. I would go with Pacheco. That game's going to be close, I feel like. I mean, all the Chiefs games are close. So I think Pacheco, despite the injury, I'm feeling pretty confident about him. That's just me, though. Take that for what you will. But on the regular scheduled show here, the Seahawks game and the Jets game. One that might not, again, seem too exciting, but this was a pretty big game for the Seattle Seahawks, and it makes me think, kind of a little bit like the Buccaneers, are the Seahawks now not the best team in the NFC West, but are they playing the best football right now? And I think those two things are very different. They sound similar, but they are different things in my mind. So, getting to it and getting to this game, Seattle, They faced a 14-point deficit early on in this game, and, traveling across the country to play New York, a pretty bad start, you could say, right, obviously, but after coming off of their bye, they win their third consecutive game after that bye week, like I said, and the final score ended up being 26-21 in favor of Seattle, and they are now still one game up on the Rams and on the Arizona Cardinals in that division, and why that matters, right? Why I kind of asked that question about the Seahawks, about whether or not they're just playing the best football right now. Not the best team, they're just playing the best football, is because playing the best football at this point in the year, you could make an argument, is probably the only thing that matters. Not really, blowing teams out or getting to, other things, right, that goes with, the team and different aspects of it, right? Just make sure that you're able to play your best football at this point. You're getting to your peak at this point of the year rather than, falling flat, if you would. That's really the most important thing that you need to consider at this point in the year. And again, I emphasize that the Seahawks, in my opinion, are not the best team in that division. I would say the Rams are better in terms of talent, and fully healthy, probably the 49ers. But the Seahawks are playing the best football right now, and I think you saw it in this game, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But on the other side of things, the Jets, I mean, different conversations, right? When you're talking about the Jets and you're talking about the Seahawks, obviously the Jets lose their third game in a row since defeating the Houston Texans back on October 31st. And, in this game, they started off with that lead, but the first half was definitely the most positive part of this game for them, because they were held scoreless the entire second half. And, You had other storylines like Geno Smith facing off against his former team. Some controversy with the referees also adds excitement to it because on the game-winning drive that ultimately ended with Zach Charbonnet scoring a touchdown to give the Seahawks that lead, there was 4 penalty flags called on the New York Jets defense, and there was 4 called on that drive and 12 in total for the Jets on Sunday, which I believe DJ Reed said after the game that that the refs should be like ashamed of themselves or something like that. Clearly, it was a big deal, right? I didn't catch every play of this game, but that is a huge thing that obviously would sway the outcome of this game. So that was a bummer for the Jets overall, but I'm sure obviously the Seahawks aren't complaining. And there was a lot of crazy things that happened in this game. You can't forget about, again, I hope I'm saying this name right, Kenny Nwagwu. Kene Nwagwu had a 99-yard kickoff return touchdown for the New York Jets, which not only, just blew the roof off of MetLife Stadium at that point in time, but you also had the Seahawks have a crazy play of their own with Leonard Williams. He intercepted Aaron Rodgers somehow, a defensive lineman, if you were unaware who Leonard Williams was. He returned an interception 92 yards all the way back to the end zone, obviously, and that made history in and of itself. Leonard Williams, his interception was the longest in NFL history by a defensive lineman, and also he was the first player since 1982 with multiple sacks, a pick six, and a block kick in one game in the NFL. So that was pretty cool, and again, it was just complete madness in this game. If you look at the game a little bit closer, there was 14 total drives by both teams in a wild first half that was 16-21 at halftime in favor of the Jets. Then you had the 5 penalties towards the Seahawks compared to the Jets 12, so that was a big discrepancy there. Both of these teams had 2 turnovers that they forced, so it was pretty even at that standpoint. And in the difference makers, or what's supposed to be the difference makers in these games, are the quarterbacks, or the veterans, the legendary kind of guys that do make up some of these teams, right? You look at Seattle with DK, JSN, Leonard Williams in his own right as well. Devin Witherspoon is an exciting young player. They have a lot of playmakers, but the Jets have the legendary quarterback, right, Aaron Rodgers, and it's another game where, yes, it is disappointing. Yes, it is lackluster. I think those would be pretty accurate descriptions of it, but really, it was unimpressive, right? But there was just the fact that there was a couple missed throws that, usually he makes. Usually he makes those kind of throws, and I've been pretty hesitant about, just saying like, oh, it's Aaron Rodgers, right? They stink because it's Aaron Rodgers. He's not playing to the Hall of Fame level that he should be, but I've been pretty hesitant to hold off on that. But again, in this game where he is missing those throws, and it just feels like it's uncomfortable in this offense, in that uniform, I think he continues to look worse and worse in that Jets uniform. And then when you consider the fact that, Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson, right, 2 phenomenal weapons that you can have at the quarterback position. Davante Adams was targeted 12 times and Garrett Wilson was targeted 10 times, and both of them had 5 receptions. So it doesn't exactly scream efficiency, or it doesn't exactly scream that this offense was just humming down the field in the entirety of the game. It suggests and it kind of emphasizes those struggles in the second half because they weren't able to put any points up at all in the second half. So those struggles on offense, that disconnect obviously is there with Aaron for whatever reason with the offense and the receivers, Davante, Garrett Wilson, really Breece Hall too. It just feels like it's not all there for whatever reason. And again, I don't like saying that it's just simple as Aaron Rodgers just isn't the same guy, because I think it has to be more complicated than that. So, I mean, it's the same story with the Jets so far, or at least through the last couple weeks. But it is what it is right now on that standpoint. But, you look at Seattle, and going back to that question, because I think it is pretty interesting, because they are, to me, on that question, I believe they are playing the best football. But again, I don't think they're the best team in that division, right? If you look at certain positions, right, the wide receivers in this division, you have DK, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and we'll throw Tyler Lockett in there, right? Then you have Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Demarcus Robinson, you could say. Then Debo, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Juwan Jennings, right? And the Arizona Cardinals, Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. DK, Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's had a very good year. And Tyler Lockett, I would probably have them like second at most. You can make an argument with Debo and Brandon Ayuk, but I think Puka and Cooper Kupp are more talented and are better receivers than both of those two guys. So that's one thing. The quarterback position, obviously, I think a lot of people would take Matthew Stafford over all those quarterbacks probably. So that's the quarterback position. The running back position, same thing. Christian McCaffrey, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, and who else am I forgetting? Kyron Williams. At most, maybe Kenneth Walker's probably, again, 2 at that point, but he's not the best, right? And then you could probably make the argument as we go down the line of positions, right? So that kind of just suggests my point that the Seahawks are not this stacked team. They're not the best team in that division, I think, pretty convincingly. But they're just playing the best football right now. Their defense is a lot improved. Leonard Williams, he had a monster game. Devin Witherspoon in that secondary is playing a lot better. They're getting turnovers. They're getting to the quarterback especially too. And on the offensive side of the ball, they're not hurting themselves with the turnovers. The running game isn't that great, which I will point out. But, Jackson Smith-Njigba is turning into a very reliable receiver. And he's nowhere near his ceiling, obviously. But he is making big strides, which is great for them. And DK Metcalf is still doing his thing. So they are definitely improving, and they're all, it feels like, hitting their flow at this point in the season, which is great to see if you're a Seahawks fan. And it just feels like, credit to Mike Macdonald too, because he has a lot to do with this, for how disciplined this team looks, and just how they just look like they're in stride right now. Like, everything is hitting for them when and where it's supposed to. And for such a young coach like Mike Macdonald, to get this team where they are right now with a couple doubts heading into this year, and the division, at the beginning of the year, they were probably penciled in to finish at best third, probably, with the 49ers and the Rams probably having, being ahead of them in most people's predictions. So, again, credit to them. They're playing the best football right now, in my opinion. Not the best team, and I think that just makes it even better, I would say, for, the way the playoffs stack out. Because whoever wins and whoever is playing better, like the Seahawks are, is probably going to be the only one to make the playoffs, because I don't think the Commanders are going to drop out. The Packers and the Vikings are definitely going to be in. So there's only one spot left, or maybe one or two for the NFC West. So it's just kind of like how hot you can get at this point in the year. And if the Rams can kind of step it up a little bit, with their talent, they already beat the Seahawks. Maybe they could steal that spot away from them. The NFC West is insane right now. So those games are just going to get better as we move along. But we're going to preview Week 14 here a little bit. Not the full thing like we do on Thursdays and Fridays, but we're going to preview one game, the Falcons and the Minnesota Vikings game. Kirk Cousins playing against his former team. I had to talk about it. There's a lot going into this. There's a lot riding on it for both sides. So we're going to preview it, do the whole process when we return after this break. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Looking ahead a little bit to Week 14, not going through all the game picks and things like that, but I couldn't help myself but talk about the Falcons and the Vikings game. In the 1 p.m. window in Week 14, the NFL features a top-tier, best of the best petty game, right? The Falcons and their new quarterback, Kirk Cousins, new this year, obviously, traveled to Minnesota to face Kirk Cousins' former team just last year, right? He was on the Vikings last year. He left in free agency this year and signed a pretty awesome 100 with both of these teams, with Kirk and how he connects both of them. And looking at the Minnesota Vikings first, they are storming into this game with a 10-2 record as the number 5 seed currently in the playoffs and winners of the last 5 games that they've played in a row. They are, much like we talked about with the Seahawks, they are very much one of the best teams in the NFL. That kind of distinguishes them from the Seahawks, but also it looks like they're playing their best football at the right time. So the Vikings are in just as good a form as most teams in the NFL right now, whereas the Falcons and Kirk Cousins aren't really in that same conversation, right? They're trying to steal a much needed win because they're currently sitting at a 6-6 record, losers of the last 3 straight games for them, and they've allowed Tampa Bay to come all the way back from a pretty low point in the season where I believe the Buccaneers were 4-6 or 3-6 at one point when Godwin went down, Mike Evans went down. They lost to the 49ers, the Chiefs, and I believe the Falcons in that stretch of games as well. So they were at a pretty down point in the season around then, but now, after their bye week, after they were able to win their last 2 games, now they're both sitting at 6-6 with the same record, right? And I would have to assume the Falcons are definitely starting to feel that pressure, right, of not giving up this lead, especially because when you beat a division rival twice in a year, you know, that should be pretty good to at least finish above them in that division, right? But it's obviously not looking like that, at least right now, because both of the Falcons and the Buccaneers are trending in opposite directions, it seems like. And as things stand right now, it's funny because this matchup could be a little playoff preview because as the standings are right now, the Falcons are the number 4 seed, and I just mentioned the Vikings being the number 5 seed, so they would match up against each other in the first round of the playoffs, right, in the wild card round. But the game would take place in Atlanta, obviously, not Minnesota like it is this week. So this could be a little preview to what we see in the playoffs potentially, which would obviously be more more high stakes, obviously, but right now it still has a lot riding on it for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And also, you can't forget, we just talked about Kirk Cousins and how he connects both teams. We can't forget about Sam Darnold either, because he's been playing very good over the last couple of games, especially Chicago and this past week against the Cardinals. He was pivotal in getting the victory over both of those two teams, and I think there was a moment in the season where he might not have been playing great. The offense was not looking as blemish-free as it might have looked at the beginning of the year, but he's really been a big part of turning that around, and he's led them to some pretty exciting wins over the last 2 weeks against the division rival in the Bears, but also a very keen Arizona Cardinals team as well. And sticking with the Vikings here for just a little bit, looking at them, and it's only Wednesday, so there's not a lot of injury news. The only one for the Vikings that is pretty significant is Stephon Gilmore. Their defensive back suffered a strained left hamstring last week, and he's questionable as of right now at like 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on a Wednesday. So you don't really know where he'll be on Saturday or Sunday, obviously, but he's one of the most significant ones to keep track of going into this game. Then, I mentioned the Vikings and how they kind of hit a lull a little bit in this season, and what I meant by that was the 12-7 victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars, not the most impressive, obviously. Then you get that 21-13 victory over the Indianapolis Colts, which is a win. Obviously, that's great, but the first half definitely did not look great. There was a lot of mistakes, and it just looked pretty sloppy. Then the second half, obviously, it looked better, but you need to be more consistent. Then also you had losses to the Los Angeles Rams that weren't great either. You know, the offense started pretty well, then it just died off, and it got overwhelmed by the Rams offense, right? Then the loss to the Lions wasn't like too egregious, but even still, it's mainly about all the other games that I mentioned and how you still felt a little bit of doubt. At least I did with this team and the offense that maybe looks very good in some moments, but is it really that talented? Is it really well put together that they should be beating some of these teams by like a touchdown or two, but they're playing them pretty close? So I had my doubts about them, a few weeks ago when that was going down, but ever since that Titans game and then, leading up until the games just recently, I think it's shown me a lot more of what I thought this offense could be compared to what it was, against the Rams, against the Jaguars, and against the Colts, right? And Sam Darnold had a lot to do with that, right? He upped his game a little bit more. He started spreading the ball out to Jordan Addison, who's had a few good games. TJ Hawkinson, it looks like he hasn't missed a beat since his injury. So that's all that I think fills me with even more confidence now that the Vikings, I would put them pretty close to the Eagles. The Eagles are definitely closer to the Lions than anybody, but I don't think they're that far off from the Minnesota Vikings. I'm that confident in it. I might not sound like it, but I am trying to get the Vikings to that spot because they're 10-2, right? You just don't stumble into being 10-2, right? So I think the last couple of games have kind of reassured that for me for the Vikings. And then you look at the Falcons on the other hand, what they're dealing with. Not too many injuries at this point, but I just don't really know what I'm going to get from them. I don't know what I'm going to see really from Kirk Cousins, from this offense. You kind of have an idea with the defense, right? It's not the strongest point of their team. They're probably going to give up like 14, 15 points at least, usually. So really you look for this offense, but the offense really hasn't been like this juggernaut sort of team that looks like is just hitting their stride, right? You look at the game against the Broncos and a top-tier defense, and they got completely dominated in that one. Then you look at the game against the Seahawks in Atlanta, where they also just got overwhelmed by that Seahawks defense, and the offense looked a lot more prolific than their own offense, right? Then you look at this past game where somehow the Falcons defense comes through and they play a great game, but the offense again, and really Kirk Cousins throws 4 interceptions, and it's just another bad performance overall. So, this is still the same team that handed the Eagles one of their losses, right? So it makes you think that they have the capability of playing some of these teams very close. But again, you just don't know. The inconsistency is a big worry, and it's not great when your quarterback is one of the hesitations or the doubts that a lot of people may have when it comes to your team. And it's not like Kirk Cousins is being made out to be the worst or the only problem, right? But he is, you can't deny, one of the things that, looking at his recent performances, that you look at like, is there something there that we have to worry about, right? It's not like he completely swipes away those doubts. So I just don't know what to expect from the Falcons. So that's kind of where I stand with them right now. But looking at the matchups in this game before we give our prediction, the first matchup I'm looking at is a group. It's 2 groups, right? The Falcons secondary against the Minnesota Vikings, receivers, their weapons basically, right? Hawkinson, Addison, Justin Jefferson, obviously, Jalen Naylor, and a couple of the tight ends that they have. Even Aaron Jones will throw in there as well. How can that Falcons secondary kind of slow them down a little bit? Because they have weapons everywhere, right? You're definitely going to need like 2 guys on Justin Jefferson, maybe even 1 more, maybe. So that's a lot of attention going to Jefferson, right? But then the middle of the field, right, with TJ Hawkinson, the short game with TJ Hawkinson, making sure you know where he is at all times. But then once you get through those 2 guys, who's on Jordan Addison? Is it your 3rd best cornerback on him? Or, what's the plan with him? And then you look at the running game. When you're focusing on not letting anything behind you, do you take away the bodies around the box? And now is Aaron Jones having a massive day? So it's going to be a big ask for this Falcons defense, which again hasn't been their strong suit. So depending on what the outcome of that matchup is, it's going to determine the outcome of the entire game. Obviously, then the other matchup I'm looking at is Bijan Robinson going up against the top-rated run defense for the Minnesota Vikings. You have Phillips in there, you have Jonathan Grenard, who's been great, and really just their whole front 7 with Alex Van Ginkel coming down and whatnot, and Blake Cashman, excuse me. Those 2 guys are very underrated. It's a huge part of this offense and how successful they are. So is he going to be taken out of the game, or is he going to take it to this defense? Whatever the outcome is, it's going to throw the other one a lot off of their game. So that's obviously going to be a huge determinant in this game. And then lastly, I have the Falcons offensive line going up against the Vikings number 4 pass rush, front line, defensive line, basically. The Vikings have 39 sacks this year. They're number 4 in the NFL in that regard. And again, they come after you. They get to that quarterback. Brian Flores does a good job of bringing the blitz, showing you different things, confusing you. A lot of what the Chargers did, and they were pretty successful with altering Kirk Cousins, obviously. And they didn't even sack him, really. They might have sacked him 1 time, whereas the Vikings might get to Kirk Cousins a couple times, and then you don't really know what you're doing. So that's a big worry for me, and it's obviously going to be a huge matchup. But because of that, I'm going to go with the Vikings to win this game. I think they're going to win this game because mainly of that defense, and I just don't feel overly confident that the Falcons defense can respond back-to-back weeks and hold any offense to like 14 points. So the Vikings are also at home, and I think Sam Darnold is going to also want to have a point be proven in this game as well, to kind of re-emphasize and reassure everybody that he is capable of these big moment plays and whatnot. So I'm going to go with the Vikings. I think they have more than enough to get it done this upcoming week in the NFL. So with that being said, now that does conclude our show for today. Thank you guys for joining me. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast, check out the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube. Just look for the title of the show, and you can catch more coverage around the NFL with more live shows, individual videos, and just more coverage around the NFL just in general. But also, lastly, if you want to see more of the live shows and be a part of the conversation, join me each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more coverage with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow, where we're going to start previewing Week 14 in the NFL.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.